Hi boys and girls, I'm going to continue to read Charlotte's Web. The last time that we read, we remember that everybody was getting ready to go to the county fair. We know that Charlotte and Templeton, they both snuck into Wilbur's crate. So everybody's ready and off to the fair we go. So now I'm going to begin with chapter 17, and this is called Uncle. When they pulled into the fairgrounds, they could hear music and see the Ferris wheel turning in the sky. They could smell hamburgers frying and see lots of balloons. They could hear the sheep in their pens. An enormous voice over the loudspeaker said, "Attention, please. Will the owner of a Pontiac car, license number H2439, please move your car? It's near the fireworks shed." Fern said, "Can I have some money?" Avery said, "Can I have some too?" Fern wanted to go win a doll. She said, "I'm going to win a doll by spinning the wheel and having it land on my number." Avery said, "I'm going to steer a jet plane and make it bump into another one. Can I have a balloon? Can I have a frozen custard? Can I get a cheeseburger? Can I get a raspberry pop?" Mrs. Arable said, "You children be quiet until we get the pig settled." Mr. Arable suggested, "Let's let the children go off by themselves now. The fair only comes once a year." So he handed Fern 2 quarters and 2 dimes. And he gave Avery 5 dimes and 4 nickels. So he each gave both of them 70 cents. He said, "And remember, this money has to last you all day. Don't spend it in the first few minutes, and be back here at the truck at noontime so we can all have lunch together. And don't eat lots of stuff that's going to make your stomachs upset." Mrs. Arable was a little bit nervous to let them go. She said, "And if you go on the swings, hang on tight. You hang on very, very tight. Do you hear me? And don't get lost, and don't get dirty. And don't get overheated, and watch out for pickpockets. And don't cross the racetrack. Make sure you look both ways." The children grabbed each other's hand, and they danced off in the direction of the merry-go-round, toward the wonderful music and the wonderful adventure and the wonderful excitement. And they would be happy, and they would be free and pleased to do whatever they want. Mrs. Arable stood quietly and watched them go. Then she sighed. "Do you really think it's all right for them to be alone?" "Well, they've got to grow up sometime," said their dad, "and a fair is a good place to start, I guess." While Wilbur was being unloaded and taken out of his crate, crowds gathered to watch. They stared at the sign, "Zuckerman's Famous Pig." Wilbur stared back and tried to look extra good. He was pleased with his new home. The pen was grassy, and it was shaded from the sun by a shed. Charlotte, watching her chance, scrambled out of the crate and climbed up a post on the underside of the roof, and nobody noticed her. Now Templeton, he stayed quietly under the straw at the bottom of the crate. Mr. Zuckerman poured some milk into Wilbur's trough, pitched some clean hay into his pen, and then he and Mrs. Zuckerman and the Arables walked away to go look at the cattle and to see the other sights. Mr. Zuckerman particularly wanted to look at new tractors. Mrs. Zuckerman wanted to look for a new freezer. Lurvy wandered off by himself, hoping to meet up with his friends and have some fun too. As soon as the people were gone, Charlotte spoke to Wilbur. She said, "It's a good thing you can't see what I can see from up here." Wilbur said, "Why? What do you see?" "There's a pig in the next pen, and he's enormous. I'm afraid he's much bigger than you are, Wilbur." "Well, maybe he's older than I am, and he has had more time to grow." And tears began to build up in Wilbur's eyes. Charlotte said. "I'll drop down and have a closer look." Then she crawled along a beam until she was directly over top of the next pen. She let herself down on a drag line until she hung in the air just in front of the big pig's snout. Now here's the picture. Politely, Charlotte said, "May I have your name?" The pig stared at her and said, "No name. Just call me Uncle." "Very well, Uncle," replied Charlotte. "What is the date of your birth? Are you a spring pig?" "Sure, I'm a spring pig," he chuckled. "What did you think I was, a spring chicken?" "Ha ha ha, that's a good one, wasn't it?" Charlotte said, "Mildly funny. I've heard funnier ones, though. Glad to have met you, and now I must be going." She ascended slowly back and returned over to Wilbur's pen. Then she reported to Wilbur and said, "He claims he's a spring chicken, and perhaps he is. One thing is for certain. He has a most unattractive personality. He's too familiar, too noisy, and he cracks really bad jokes. Also, he's not anywhere near as clean or as pleasant as you are. I took quite a dislike to him in our brief interview. He's going to be a hard pig to beat, Wilbur, but on account of his size and his weight. But with me helping you, it can be done." Wilbur said, "When are you going to spin a new web, Charlotte?" "This afternoon, late in the afternoon, if I'm not too tired," she said. The least things tire me these days. I don't seem to have the energy like I used to. I guess it's just my age." Wilbur looked at his friend. She did look rather swollen and tired. Then he said, "I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Charlotte. Perhaps if you spin a web and catch a couple of flies, you'll feel better." "Perhaps," she said, "but I feel like it's already the end of a long day." Clinging upside down to the ceiling, she settled in for a nap, leaving Wilbur very much worried. All morning, people wandered past Wilbur's pen. Dozens and dozens of strangers stopped to stare at him and to admire his silky white coat, his curly tail, and his kind and radiant expression. Then they would move over to the next pen where the bigger pig was. Wilbur heard several people make favorable remarks about Uncle's great size. He couldn't help overhear these remarks, and he couldn't help worrying. Then he thought, and now, with Charlotte not feeling well, oh dear. All morning, Templeton slept quietly under the straw. The day grew fiercely hot. At noon, the Zuckermans and the Arables returned to the pig pen. Then a few minutes later, Fern and Avery showed up. Fern had a monkey doll in her arms and was eating some Cracker Jacks. Avery had a balloon tied to his ear and was chewing a candied apple. The children were hot and dirty. "Isn't it hot?" said Mrs. Zuckerman. "Oh, it's terribly hot," said Mrs. Arable. One by one, they climbed into the truck and opened the lunch boxes. The sun beat down on everything. Nobody even seemed hungry. "When are the judges going to decide about Wilbur?" asked Mrs. Zuckerman. "Oh, not until tomorrow," said her husband. Then Lurvy appeared, carrying a big blanket that he had won. Avery said, "Ah, just what we need, a blanket." "Of course it is," said Lurvy, and he spread the blanket across the truck so that it was like a little tent, and the children sat in the shade under the blanket and they felt much better. After lunch, they stretched out and fell asleep. And that is the end of chapter 17. Chapter 18 is called The Cool of the Evening. In the cool of the evening, when the shadows darkened the fairgrounds, Templeton crept from the crate and looked all around. Wilbur lay asleep in the straw. Charlotte was building a web. Templeton's keen nose detected many fine smells in the air. He sniffed around. The rat was hungry and thirsty. He decided to go exploring. Without saying anything to anybody, he started to walk off. Charlotte called after him and said, "Bring me back a word. I shall be writing for the last time tonight." The rat mumbled something to himself and disappeared. He did not like to be treated like a messenger boy. After the heat of the day, the evening came, and welcome was relief to all. The Ferris wheel was lighted now. It went round and round in the sky, and it seemed twice as big. There were lights on the midway, and you could hear the music of the merry-go-round and the voice of the man in the Beano booth calling numbers. The children felt refreshed after their nap. Fern met her friend Henry Fussy, and he invited her to ride with him on the Ferris wheel. He even bought a ticket for her, so it didn't cost her anything. When Mrs. Arable happened to look into the starry sky and saw her daughter sitting on the Ferris wheel with Henry Fussy, she just shook her head and said, My, Henry Fussy. What do you think of that?" Templeton kept out of sight. In the tall grass behind the cattle barn, he found a folded newspaper. Inside it were leftovers from somebody's lunch. There was a ham sandwich, a piece of Swiss cheese, a part of a hard-boiled egg, and a piece of an apple. The rat crawled in and ate everything. Then he tore a word out of the paper, rolled it up, and started back to Wilbur's pen. Charlotte had her web almost finished when Templeton returned, and he was carrying the newspaper. She left a space out in the middle of her web. At this hour, no people were around the pig pen, so the rat and the spider and the pig were all by themselves. Charlotte said, "I hope you brought a good one. It is the last word I shall ever write." "Here," said Templeton, and he unrolled the newspaper. "What does it say?" asked Charlotte. "You'll have to read it to me." The rat replied, "It says, 'Humble.'" "Humble," said Charlotte. "Humble has two meanings. It means not proud, and it means near the ground. That's Wilbur all over. He's not proud and he's near the ground." The rat sneered, "Well, I hope you're satisfied. I'm not going to spend all of my time fetching and carrying. I came to this fair to enjoy myself, not to deliver papers." Charlotte said, "You've been very helpful. Run along if you want to see more of the fair." The rat grinned. "I'm going to make a night of it. The old sheep was right. This fair is a rat's paradise. What eating and what drinking. Everywhere there's good hiding and good hunting. Bye-bye, my humble Wilbur. Fare thee well, Charlotte, you old schemer. This will be a night to remember in my life." And he vanished off into the shadows. Charlotte went back to her work. It was quite dark now. In the distance, fireworks began going off. By the time the Arables and the Zuckermans and Lurvy returned from the grandstand, Charlotte had finished her web. The word humble, Humble, was woven neatly into the center of her web. Nobody noticed it in the darkness. Everybody was tired and happy. Fern and Avery climbed into the truck and lay down. They pulled the blanket over them. Lurvy gave Wilbur a forkful of fresh straw. Mr. Arable patted him. He said, "Time for us to go home, but we'll see you tomorrow." The grown-ups climbed slowly into the truck, and Wilbur heard the engine start and saw the truck drive away. He would have felt lonely and homesick if Charlotte was not with him. He never felt lonely when she was near. In the distance, he could still hear the music of the merry-go-round. As he was dropping off to sleep, he spoke to Charlotte, and he said, "Charlotte, sing me a song again, please." In a low voice, she said, "Not tonight, Wilbur. I'm too tired." But her voice didn't seem as though it came from her web. And Wilbur asked, "Where are you? I can't see you. Are you on your web?" "I'm back here," she answered. "I'm up here in the back corner." "Why aren't you on your web? You almost never leave your web." "I've left it tonight," she said. Wilbur closed his eyes. "Charlotte, do you really think Zuckerman will let me live and not kill me when the cold weather comes? Do you really think so?" "Of course," she said. "You are a famous pig. You are a good pig. Tomorrow you will probably win a prize. The whole world will hear about you. Zuckerman will be proud and happy to own such a pig. You have nothing to fear, Wilbur. Nothing to worry about. Maybe you'll live forever. Who knows? And now, go to sleep." For a while there was no sound. Then Wilbur's voice again. "What are you doing up there, Charlotte?" She said, "Oh, making something. Making something as usual." "Is it something for me?" asked Wilbur. "No," said Charlotte. "It's something for me, for a change." "Please tell me what it is," begged Wilbur. "I'll tell you in the morning," she said. "I'll tell you when the first light comes into the sky. You can look up here and I'll show you something, and I will show you my masterpiece." Before she finished her sentence, Wilbur was asleep. She could tell by the sound of his breathing that he was sleeping peacefully deep in the straw. Miles away at the Arable's house, the men sat down in the kitchen eating a dish of peaches and talking about today's events. Upstairs, Avery was already in bed and fast asleep. Mrs. Arable was tucking Fern into bed. She said, "Did you have a good time at the fair?" And then she kissed her daughter. Fern nodded, she said. "I had the best time I have ever had anywhere in my whole entire life." "Well," said her mother, "that's so nice." And that's the end of chapter 18.